If you clicked on this video because you're someone who often feels that you put other people ahead of yourself, that you meet other people's needs but you feel that your needs aren't met in return, that you think that you're a nice person but you're a people pleaser, if you often feel resentful towards other people because you feel that you give so much and you don't get much back in return, then I'm here just to share some thoughts with you about that today, and maybe to look at how that could be maybe a little bit of a toxic trait. People who consider themselves people pleasers, and this was very much me in the past, consider themselves to be nice people. So they're kind people, they're people who don't want to harm other people, they're people who think that they care about other people and do care about other people genuinely, and they want to be kind. They're generally selfless or consider themselves selfless. So it might come as a little bit of a shock to hear that actually when you are doing your people pleasing, that you could be harming other people, and that behaviour is actually rooted in a type of control. So how is that? And just to say, I'm not saying this with any judgment or to cause any shame, because often people that are people pleasers certainly carry a lot of that already. So that's not the purpose of why I'm saying this. I'm saying this in the hope that for you that there might be freedom and also healthier relationships that come as a result of learning this. So I'm going to give you an example maybe to explain the point. So say you are going out for dinner with your partner or out on a date, and the person, your partner or your date, has said that they want to go to a sushi restaurant, but you hate sushi. So in this example, you could either say, I really don't like sushi, could we go somewhere else? Or you could go along to get along, and you could not say that you hate sushi, and you could go along and put that person's needs, we'll get onto that in a bit, ahead of your own, or what you think the other person wants to hear, or what you think the other person would like. So you could say that that is you being nice, that is you making sure that the other person has a nice evening. They've been talking about this amazing new sushi place. It's like the best new place in town, and they seemed really excited about it. So you're facilitating them having a nice time. You could say that. And if you made that choice intentionally, not based in any of what I'm about to talk about throughout the rest of the video, that might be the case. But if, for example, you're making that choice rooted in a fear, which we'll talk about later, then there could be some really negative consequences to that. So, for example, let's continue with this date. So say you go along to get along, you please the other person, and you go to the restaurant secretly dreading it. So you spend all day now dreading going to this sashimi place and eating raw fish, and the thought of eating raw fish is horrible. So you're starting to feel already beforehand you're not really looking forward to the date anywhere near as much as you were the day before when you thought you'd be getting pizza. So you go along, you're at the restaurant, you're probably a bit less talkative than you usually would be because you're just thinking about trying to eat dead fish that's not been cooked. You are maybe starting to experience a slight feeling of resentment towards your partner because they're chowing down on their food, having a great time. You spend the rest of the day trying to make conversation, having an okay time, but probably still thinking it would have been amazing to just go get pizza. You go home feeling hungry, more and more resentment builds, and you end the evening having nowhere near as much fun as you would have done, as you could have done if you'd been authentic with yourself and with them. Now, in this situation, there are a few things that are going on. Firstly, on some level, you have abandoned yourself. Even though we're just talking about dinner options here, so there's no great stakes, and we will talk about some more serious examples of this later on. But there is a you that's inside that desperately wants to be eating pizza. There's always a me inside that desperately wants to eat pizza, but you know what I mean? There's a you that is not being attended to because you are tending to the other person's needs, or what you perceive are the other person's needs. However, for people pleasers and codependents, which I consider myself a codependent in recovery, saying that you are abandoning yourself or harming yourself, sadly, often isn't really enough to it doesn't, you often people will abandon themselves all the time and have such little self-regard that doesn't really mean anything to them. However, if you were to say that actually you are harming the other person in doing this, even on the level of sushi or no sushi, then that sometimes hits a bit different for people who are codependent or people who are people pleasers, which I'm probably going to make another video about codependence and people pleasers and the crossover there. But for now, yeah, the point that I'm trying to make is that, sadly, often saying that you're harming someone else is enough to make people go, me, to think about it. So how are you harming the other person by abandoning your own needs and, for example, going along for sushi when you hate sushi? Well, firstly, by agreeing to do something that you don't actually really want to do, you are pretending that you are someone you are not. So when I first had this realisation that you are essentially being dishonest, it really gave me the ick about myself, and it can be quite a hard thing to really see in yourself, you know, because you can think that language like you're pretending to be someone that you're not is the kind of mask behaviour that actually is sort of reserved for narcissists or people in the dark triad, you know, spectrum, or so it can not be something that we like to admit in ourselves, but on some level we are, you know, your date or your partner now thinks that they are in a relationship or on a date with someone who likes sushi, and they're not. So they're not really getting to know you, and on some level you have tricked them into believing something that is not true. So that in itself obviously is harmful for the other person, because they are now not living in, I guess, like consensual reality. You know, you assume that if someone says, yeah, cool, we'll go to sushi, that they like sushi. So that's, on one level, that's harmful, because if, for example, later down the line, you actually then say, actually, I hate sushi, then they've been living in a whole different reality, which is quite confusing for them. That creates sort of cognitive dissonance and all sorts of stuff for them that can be quite damaging. So that's the first way that it can be harmful. So in addition to being essentially dishonest, pretending that you're someone that you're not, the other way that it can be quite icky and harmful and, I guess, a little bit shadowy is that in your abandoning of your thoughts, feelings, preferences, desires, with the pursuit or intention of trying to keep the other person happy or make the other person happy, you are essentially trying to manage their feelings and their experiences in kind of a controlling way. Now, you might think, well, hold on a minute, I'm just facilitating them having a nice evening. But actually, you're not, because if, for example, the reason that you've said that you will go along to the sushi restaurant that you really don't want to go to, rather than say, I'd really rather go somewhere else, is because you are trying to manage or avoid them having feelings of disappointment, or, I don't know, whatever else you might feel, you know, disappointment, let down, or any other negative feelings. And I used to be terrible for this. This was a real big one for me, but I can't make the other person feel a negative feeling. You are essentially putting yourself into a kind of higher power, playing God. Oh, there's my cat, Luna, I'll get her in a minute. You're putting yourself into a kind of higher power management role within their life that's sort of infantilizing for the other person. It's essentially saying that they are, on some level, and obviously you're not consciously thinking this, and I'm sure this will sound mortifying to all of you nice people, people pleasers, but you're trying to manage their experience, and essentially you're saying that you don't view them as someone who's able to process those feelings. So, for example, you know, if you were to say, hey, look, actually, I really don't want to go and do that. I'd rather go somewhere else. Even if you previously said yes, even if you actually go, I've decided I really don't fancy sushi right now, they might feel disappointment. They might feel an array of feelings. But that's okay, because they're an adult, and you can have faith that an adult, a healthy adult, will be able to process some feelings of disappointment and to be able to do with that as they see fit. However, if you go about things by sort of denying them that ability, by that opportunity, sorry, then you're kind of playing God. You're being dishonest, but you're also trying to kind of manage reality for them in a way that's controlling. The other thing that's quite ironic about this is that often you're assuming what you think that the other person needs or wants. So to stay with the sushi example, and I promise we will move on from the sushi example soon, but to stay with the sushi example, you have made an assumption that what the other person really wants and needs is to eat sushi, right? Because they've raved about the sushi place, and you think that what they actually need is to eat sushi and to experience the place, and that's the most important thing. But actually, what might be the most important thing for them is to give you a really special experience, or to find a really beautiful place to connect with you and to get to know you better. So in you sort of going along to get along, or being dishonest, or people pleasing, or whatever you want to call it, not being authentic to you, you've kind of robbed them potentially of what their true needs could be. I have loads of examples of this in my life, but a recent one is my partner I'd had a really, really long day, so I'm training to be a counsellor at the moment, and I'm also working home as well, so there's a lot going on. And I've been to college, and it had been a really, really heavy day. A lot of heavy, difficult topics, a lot of talking, a lot of group discussion, really interesting, absolutely loved the day, but by the time I got home I was feeling exhausted. My partner texted me on the way back and was saying he was really looking forward to kind of connecting with me that evening and having some us time. If I was really honest, what I actually wanted to do when I got home was to just be on my own for a bit. But because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to disappoint him, rather than just say, I kind of really need to just be on my own. Come on, Luna can come sit with us for a minute. Rather than say that, I assumed what he wanted was to connect with me. So I didn't choose my authentic self and say, I'm really sorry, I actually think I just need to go and sit in a dark room for 15-20 minutes, or have a bath, or listen to music, or whatever it is that I needed to do. I just went along, and when I got home, I was withdrawn. I wasn't really conscious that I was, but I wasn't very chatty really. I was trying to be sociable, but kind of struggling a bit because I was tired, and I think my partner could just kind of sense that I wasn't fully present, and he then actually started to feel a little bit upset. Eventually I was able to be honest, and just say, I'm really sorry, I think I just need to have a bit of time just to decompress. And I think I was a bit tearful actually at the time as well, just overloaded, overstimulated too much, because this is often also what happens, which we'll move on to later on, when you're not being honest with yourself or with the other person. When I actually told him, I think I just need to chill for a bit, he was, oh my God, if you just, I can run you a bath. Let me go and do something nice for you. I didn't know that that's what you wanted. I didn't know that's what you needed. He was just trying to do something nice for me, and he thought that having some connected us time, because I'm usually quite a sociable person, would be what I needed. But actually, what I needed was some alone time. So what I'm trying to say is that you can make assumptions, and often we think that we're giving the other person what they want or need, but actually we're completely missing the mark. And it's only through really being authentic with ourselves and with the other person that the other person gets to know us, that we get to know us, and that they have the opportunity to meet those needs for us, but also just to know if they can or not. And often I've found, ironically, and there's a bit of a tragedy in this, because you can spend so much time trying to please people and it not work. There's an irony and a tragedy in the fact that when you're actually authentic with yourself and what you want and what your needs are, often it's then that people will meet your needs in return, and that you are going to feel that there's an equal give and take. So the next thing that I wanted to, that naturally leads on here, is the fact that it can start to feel, when you start to do this, if you start to be kind of authentic with people and to say things that you think are going to be difficult for other people to hear, it can often feel really scary, and it can bring up a lot of big feelings, often rooted in fear. So this can be a fear of abandonment, a fear of conflict, even just a fear of tension, There can be a fear of being disliked as well. But essentially all of these things are rooted in a fear or a lack of safety on some level. And a lot of the time this will be rooted in often some sort of childhood experience where, for example, and I have an experience of this myself in childhood, you know, if you state a need or if you say something that, you know, someone, in my childhood it was my dad, if you sort of say something that you think the other person isn't going to like and then they do abandon you, or if there is a negative consequence, then you can learn that it's not safe to, trying to avoid Luna showing her bum to the camera, you can learn that it's not safe, but the reality is that we are now adults and that we are safe. I mean, sometimes it might not be. If you are in any situation that genuinely is not safe in terms of there being any kind of physical danger, then obviously do what you need to do and be safe. But in terms of, you know, conversations where there's a fear of abandonment, we can know that we are safe in ourselves, that we are safe with ourselves, we are adults, we are able to tend to our own needs. And that might be the work to do with a therapist, or it might be work to do in Coda, which I've found really useful, which is Codependency Anonymous, or with support groups, or journaling, or on your own, or whatever works for you. However, this is also where I think that having some sort of spiritual belief is really powerful and can be really helpful, because if you can believe that you are being held and that you are being kept safe by a spiritual a higher power or a spiritual power, and that doesn't have to be God with a capital G, it can be the idea of the flow of spirit, of nature, it can be sort of the universal oneness or consciousness, or it can be even your community, then you are going to have an easier time letting go of that fear of abandonment, because you're going to know that you're safe, that you're held, that you're not the higher power, that you don't need to control everything to make sure everything's okay, that you're going to be okay regardless. And I think I'll make another video on this, because there's a lot to that that I could talk about, but I'm aware that the video could end up being really long if I do, so I'll save that for another time. So now that we've really taken that example with the sushi, I think, to the end of the line, maybe let's move on to how that can actually play out in relationships on a much bigger scale that can have really quite tragic consequences. So say, for example, you're in a relationship where when you both got into the relationship, neither of you wanted kids. And say, a bit further down the line, actually you change your mind on this and say that you think actually maybe you do want kids. You've got two options. You can either keep that to yourself, or you can express that to your partner. And after that point, you've got obviously many options. But all of them have the choice of kind of being true to yourself, or people pleasing, or what is often also called fawning. It's, you know, abandoning your own needs for the other person's needing to make them happy. You know, yeah, this could be something that could end the relationship. If you decide to speak your truth and to say, actually, I've decided that this is really important for me. If the other person's, you know, needs don't align with that, or wishes or desires or whatever you want to call it, future doesn't align with that, then yeah, then they could leave. You know, that might be the end of the relationship. But what is the other option? You know, the other option is to be in a further and further and further state of disconnection from yourself, from your wants, from your desires. It's to completely abandon yourself. It's to essentially say, I'm unimportant, my needs are unimportant, my life is unimportant. But not only that, which is obviously tragic in itself, and this is, you know, something that I've experienced in my own life in terms of consequences of, you know, codependency, all sorts of aspects of my life that really I've squandered when I was in a real state of codependency, of just focusing on what the other person wants, because you can be so disconnected from yourself that you don't even know what you want, because you're so focused on the other person and meeting the other person's needs. So the consequences can be huge in relationships, and really tragic. But not only that, can they be difficult and tragic for yourself, which unfortunately, as I said earlier on, that often isn't enough of a wake-up call for the codependent or the people pleaser or the nice person, whatever you want to call it. But the other thing is that it's harmful to the other person, because ultimately in healthy relationships what people want is real, genuine connection, and to know the other person, and to have your person. And if you're pretending that you're someone that you're not, essentially by denying your own needs, your own desires, your own wishes, your own wants, then you're not only harming yourself, but you're also harming the other person. So how do we move beyond inauthenticity, people pleasing, and into a state of authenticity in our relationships? I think the first thing is courage. So it's knowing that we are going to be able to say no, or insert a boundary, or express a need or a thought or a desire that the other person might not like to hear, and that we will be safe. Or if that we're not safe, that we will be okay, that we can be okay. And that does involve drawing down on a little bit of courage and a little bit of trust. You know, there's trust, as I mentioned already, in a higher power, which is helpful. But there's also trust in you as, you know, someone who is able to look after you. And often with codependents and people pleasers, we're very good at looking after everyone else, but we're kind of fearful almost of, like, if someone, for example, gets mad at me, then like, what will I do? And so, well, you'll look after yourself, you'll be okay. So I think there's a little bit of courage to be drawn on, a little bit of trust. The next thing I think is just practice. I think it's one of those things that when you start doing this, it feels really scary. And that's, I think, because we're going back into a kind of child state almost, either from childhood trauma, you know, or just a disempowered place. And I think that the more that we learn to you know, express what we want, to say what we don't want, to communicate, and the more that we realise that we're not going to be abandoned most of the time, or that even if we are abandoned, that we will be okay. The more that we do that, the easier it gets, because the more that we have our own back, and the more that our experience tells us that we're safe. So I think it's one of those things that you just have to start doing, and it does get easier. The next thing that can be helpful for a way of moving through this is seeing the behaviour for what it is. As I said earlier on, I think that it's very easy to kind of think that you're just being a nice person, and that you're putting the other person's needs first. But when you actually see that there's an element of dishonesty, over or otherwise, that can be at play, and that there can be control, and that actually that's quite icky and not really in alignment with our own values, it becomes easier to sort of bring some awareness to what's going on, and to just note it, not to go into a state of shame about it and to think, oh God, I'm a terrible person, because you're not. It's just a learned coping mechanism that you can let go of now. But it's important just to start noticing it, because as I said earlier on, it can be such an automatic way of responding to situations that you cannot even realise that you're doing it. I still do this regularly, where, you know, small things or big things, where I'll sort of go, oh, I'm fawning again, or I didn't really mean that, you know. But it does get easier, and the things become smaller and less frequent. But it's just about bringing mindfulness and awareness to you know, the behaviour. And I think finally, this is again linked to that mindfulness, is maybe doing some inner child work. Is, you know, looking at what feelings come up when you actually do start to move away from people pleasing and move into more of an authenticity, more of your authenticity, and more of an authentic state. Because what can come up can be feelings of fear, as I already said, but sometimes it can be feelings of intimidation, or it can be quite painful, and there can be you know, difficult stuff that's brought up through this. So being kind to yourself, being kind to your own inner child, but also the child that experienced maybe something difficult in the past that meant that they learned to put the other people's needs ahead of their own, or at the expense of their own. That can be helpful, and it might be the kind of process that's helped with by therapy, obviously with the support of another person, or journaling, or support groups, or whatever else works for you. So I think that's pretty much the end of my extended waffle about people pleasing and the shadow side of people pleasing. And I hope it's been helpful, and I hope that you have a few things to take away from it, and I'll catch you soon.